Hi, I'm Dr. Ross, and this video is understanding where research literature comes from in the first place. How does it get generated, and how do we then get our hands on it? So to start, academics use a lot of different words to describe what I just referred to as research literature, primary literature, a manuscript, a paper, a research paper, a publication. They all mean the same thing when we're talking colloquially. Here, I'm just showing some thumbnails of a recent manuscript that I and some co-authors worked on. You can ignore the red squigglies and the blue. That's just Microsoft Word's markup feature for things that it thinks are misspelled. But the point is that this is basically 36 pages of text. And this is a manuscript that we've recently submitted to a journal to consider for publication. So that's what we're talking about today is how does something I write as a scientist get from just being mine to something that a journal will share with an audience? So first, what are my motivations and what are your motivations to want to publish research that you do? Well, primarily it's to share your knowledge, because if you're doing a lot of work generating information, learning cool things about biology, say, if you're a STEM scholar and you're working in biology or the biological sciences, if you don't tell other people what you find, you might as well have not done that at all because no one else knows what you discovered. So that's the main point. And you may understand that this is where all the information in your textbooks comes from, our primary research studies, where scientists have done research, written that sort of report like I showed you on the prior slide, and then send it to a journal to ask them to publish it. And again, that's the process that we're talking about today. How does a paper come to be? Other reasons to publish, as you see here, are to do things that give you credit for that effort that you put in. So for major scientists, for most scientists, you get career advancement, promotions, for example, based on how much you publish and the quality of your publications, whether you publish with other people or not. If you work as a team, they help you get grants to fund future research. If you can prove that past money you've received to do research was fruitful and got results that were publishable. And then some people publish, most of us, I think, to a certain extent, publish for fame, to showcase the cool things that we're doing because we're excited about that work. Okay. We also publish, somewhat related to the share knowledge part, to help others. Because if we publish data that someone else is working on a similar project, that can actually help them advance their research. We can also publish things that don't work, although it's harder to do that in some respects, so that other people don't try fruitlessly approaches, techniques, and so forth that don't work. Okay, so there are multiple reasons to publish. This is just a few. Now, here's the big part here is the publication process. So the first step in publication is always doing the research, right? Scientific method. We read previously published research literature, right? We understand what's already been done. That helps us identify what needs to be done next, the gap in knowledge, formulate a hypothesis or a goal, design experiments to address that hypothesis, then collect the data, analyze the data, and interpret the data. That is, decide, for example, whether the hypothesis was supported or not. Now, you might not be familiar with some of the rest of these steps now. Practicing scientists then have to decide if what they discovered is actually worth sharing. That is, if it's worth their time to follow the rest of this process, because this is a very time-intensive process. So steps 3, 4, and 5 here in a different color, because these are the details that I'm going to explain a little bit more in this video today. If you do the research and you think it's worth sharing, then scientists will actually write that manuscript, which is basically a fancy, elaborate version of what you might consider a typical lab report for a research class, for a laboratory class. Then that manuscript, report, paper, whatever you want to call it, the authors send to one of many, many, many journals, and that journal decides if they want to publish that research paper. And if the editor that receives the manuscript thinks that, yeah, it might be appropriate for my journal to publish, then they will send the manuscript to 3 peer reviewers. And that's one of the key parts of this video today, is understanding a little bit about how the research that I might do in my manuscript gets vetted or authenticated by other experts in the field before the journal decides to publish it. That's called peer review. And then if my If the journal does like my manuscript, they send it for peer review. Then those expert reviewers will read the manuscript, give the editor feedback on what they like, what they don't like, what they think is wrong or needs to be changed or redone, for example. The editor then sends me their comments anonymously, so I don't know who the reviewers are. And the editor says, well, the manuscript's pretty good. It's maybe conditionally accepted for publication if I will take the reviewer's comments and address them, revise the manuscript to address their comments. So then maybe I revise and resubmit the manuscript. Maybe it gets peer reviewed again so that the reviewers get a chance to see the changes I made and decide whether that was sufficient or not. Finally, then in step 7, ideally, the manuscript gets accepted for publication. The journal will put that manuscript, along with lots of other ones from different scientists, together in one issue of their publication. And then, weirdly, which I don't have time to get into today, I, the scientist, pay the journal to publish my work, typically, which is really weird because I've spent a lot of money and a lot of my time doing the research, and then I also have to pay to get it shared. And again, the incentive for my wanting to pay to get my research published, I talked about on one of the previous slides. There's a lot of prestige. It will help my career prospects. So this is kind of a weird dynamic in scientific publication, and it can lead to some problems, which we're going to talk about briefly in a little bit. One of which is there are conflicts of interest. So if I want to publish my work really badly, there's a lot of temptation for me to maybe do unethical things like fudge my data, to manipulate my data, or to change some images to make my results look nicer. And that's one of the things that the peer reviewers are supposed to be looking for when they review papers is scientific misconduct. That's a little bit of a tangent. So you might be asking right now, I've explained what a manuscript is, a fancy lab report explaining research. What about these journals that are receiving my manuscript and deciding whether they want to publish them? Well, here are 3 covers of 3 very well-known scientific journals: the journal Science, the journal Cell, and the journal whose abbreviation is PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America. So these are 3 fairly prestigious publications for biomedical research. If you ask any scientist, they will know Science, Nature, another one that I haven't shown here, Cell, and PNAS. Okay, so here are some URLs to the online versions of these journals. But really, the point here is that you can see the cover images for 3. These are basically magazines. Journals used to be, and some to a certain extent still are, print magazines where the content of the magazine is mostly research manuscripts, papers. They also publish a few other sorts of articles as well in these magazines. Now, of course, in this millennium, a lot of the content has moved online, but the journals still deliver. So they do deliver online electronic versions of the journals, but you can still get some of them in print. So you can think of it as the physical object that's like a magazine, like a textbook you could pick up, or you can think about them as online distributors of PDFs that are these research articles. So that's journals. Those are the people that we're sending the manuscripts to, and they will decide whether they want to send the manuscript out for peer review. Now, interestingly, different journals, and this is important for you to understand as you start to read scientific literature, primary research articles, etc., that different journals have different requirements for the content. And I'm going to talk about content in a different video, and also the format. So for example, you can see here that in the journal Science and also in Nature, which is another famous journal, typically those are short articles, research articles, 5 pages after they're formatted, between 2,000 and 3,000 words, a small number of figures, and limited number of references or citations, which is really odd to some. But the point of Science and Nature and the way they format their papers is they're very small, they're very condensed, they're easy to read, but typically only if you're an expert in the field already, because there are so few references, there's not enough space for the authors to fully explain the background and the introduction of what they're doing. Now, PNAS is a little bit longer at 6 formatted pages and a little bit longer at 4,000 words, still limitation on figures or tables and references. And then there's, for example, Cell, which tends to be around 10 formatted pages, much longer, almost twice the length of the PNAS article, and a limitation to 7 figures or tables. So the point here is that different journals have different formats. So when you pick up an article from different journals, they will look different. There'll be different lengths, and some are easier or harder to read based on that length limitation. And again, I'll go through the actual content and the structure of manuscripts in a different video. Okay, so this is what the authors are spending a lot of their time doing when they choose a journal to submit an article to. Then they have to write their research report, their article, the manuscript, but they have to make sure that if they're going to submit it to one of these journals, that they've done it in the right way. So hopefully at this point you're wondering, well, how does a journal, or how does a scientist choose which journal to send their manuscript to? Basically, it depends on many factors. I'm going to highlight 2 here. The third one that I'm going to highlight that I'm not showing is fame or prestige. So if you ask most scientists, they would love to publish in Nature, Science, or Cell, which are some of the top tier, in theory, journals that have very low manuscript acceptance rates because the editors of those journals want everybody to want to read those really fancy, groundbreaking, earth-shattering papers that they choose to publish from scientists. So that's one thing, is it's better if you can get into a fancier, more broadly read, more widely distributed journal so more people see your work. That has to be balanced with that acceptance rate, that most journals will decline a significant number of papers that are submitted to them in the first place. They won't even send them out for peer review. It's called a desk rejection. The editor gets the manuscript, they look at it, they say, it doesn't really fit our journal, sorry, no. And then the scientists would reformat their manuscript for the structure of a different journal and try again at a different journal. So there's some balancing here between that reflection by the scientists of, is my research cool enough to get into one of the top tier journals, or should I aim lower? Another factor is the appropriateness of the audience. So journals tend to have some journals have very specific topics they cover, like molecular evolution or organic chemistry. And I wouldn't want to send my manuscript on a topic related to molecular evolution to a journal that is a chemistry journal. So there's a lot in the background here where scientists need to understand their literature, the types of journals that exist, and try to pick one that they think is very likely to accept their journal and their manuscript and send it for peer review. And then there's cost. And different journals charge different amounts to publish. And I don't have time to get into that right now, but it can range from hundreds of dollars to multiple thousands of dollars for a scientist to publish, to pay the journal to publish their manuscript once it gets peer reviewed and accepted. All right, so about this peer review process then. The purpose of peer review, I mentioned just a bit earlier, is to have experts in my field, if I'm the scientist trying to get my research published, have peers of mine who know the ins and outs of the techniques that I'm using, the types of analyses. They will read the manuscript and tell the editor of the journal whether they think I've done the research appropriately, reproducibly, that I haven't made any mistakes, for example, and I'm also not trying to cheat the system by faking data, for example, and submitting data that aren't even real. So that's the goal of peer review, is to make sure that only quality research is actually published and distributed to the community. Now, the process of peer review, I've alluded to a little bit. Manuscript goes to the editor at the journal. The editor picks typically 3 experts in the field, and I don't know who they are. So this is called anonymous or blind. Well, blind is a little bit different. This is anonymous peer review, single blind peer review. I don't know who the 3 reviewers are, but they know who I am because my name is on the manuscript as one of the authors. And that can lead to some problems, like if some of the reviewers are biased against me, if we have personality conflicts, we know each other and we don't get along, those sorts of things. And then there are also some conflict of interest issues as well, which are similar to that, right? That if there's a dynamic between a reviewer and an author that's not good, then you might not get a fair peer review. And one of the main problems with peer review is that the peer reviewers are practicing scientists who already have jobs and have lots of other things to do because we're all busy. But and this is really weird, I pay the journal to publish my manuscript to cover the costs of the journal existing as an organization, and the cost of them having to pay people to format it and create the PDF and run the websites and put it online and print the print versions. I don't get paid to publish. I pay the journal to publish. The peer reviewers volunteer their time to be peer reviewers. And that sets up another issue with the process, which is that if the peer reviewers are people too, and they're busy, and maybe they don't do a great job of peer reviewing my manuscript or any manuscript when they read it. Maybe they just do a cursory read through and they say, yeah, it looks fine, editor, it's good, please accept it and publish it. Well, that's not great, but peer review is still the gold standard for authenticating research. It's what every journal uses, but down there at the bottom, remember that reviewers are people too, and it's only a handful, 2, 3, 4 maybe, experts in different fields sometimes that review one manuscript. So it's a very, very small fraction of all people that are actually taking a look at the manuscript and helping the editor decide whether it should be published. So just because it's published doesn't mean it can absolutely be trusted. And that means that you and everybody that reads research needs to keep in the back of your mind that you should do the critical thinking yourself. If you can redo some analyses in the paper and double check and make sure that they were done properly, cast a critical eye on every paper that you read. Now, if you want to check out some peer reviews to see what they look like, some journals have started to publish the peer reviews. Again, the peer reviews are anonymous. The authors of the peer reviews can choose whether to append their name, to sign their name to their reviews, or leave them anonymous. But again, some journals have started publishing the reviews. So here's one example, the journal eLife. As part of the structure or the model of this journal is that authors submit a manuscript and then it undergoes sort of a public peer review. Again, everybody, the reviewers' names are anonymous, but you can actually look at the paper. So here we're looking at an arbitrary paper that I chose about the evolution of hairlessness in mammals. And so you can download the article here and read the published research article, but you can also get the access to the reviews themselves. So if you scroll down on this page, you see a short blurb that the editor of the journal wrote about why they thought this was useful to publish. But then if you select the Reviews on Society link, that will take you to a page where you can read the full text of the 3 peer reviewers' comments about this paper. And that might help you better understand what were the reviewers' concerns about the paper. You can also read the author's response to the reviews on this page. So let's just quickly check it out. If we scroll down, we get the abstract of the paper, and then we have at the top, because it's in reverse chronological order, the author's written response to the 3 reviewers. So you can click the More button here and see the full text of what the authors said in response to the reviews. Down farther are the reviews from Reviewer 1, Reviewer 2, and Reviewer 3. So again, if you want to check out what some peer reviews in science look like, this is a great resource. Not many journals currently publish the peer reviews. eLife does, and maybe a handful of others. This is a good way to get started thinking about what do reviewers look for in publications when they're reviewing them. Okay, now, because there are some conflicts of interest here, and I, as the scientist, really want to get my research published, there are some issues like predatory publishing, which is the idea that anybody can publish a paper. You could be a publisher of scientific manuscripts. All it really takes is for you to pay somebody to make you a website, or maybe you make your own website, and then you buy an ISBN number from the Library of Congress, for example, the little 10 or so digit number that identifies you as that publishing company. And then you can set up your website and start emailing, spamming people saying, hey, I'm a publisher, send me your manuscript, I'll make sure it's peer reviewed, and then I'll publish it. And by that, I mean, I could be a publisher. You send me your Word document or Google document of your manuscript, I'll convert it into a PDF and stick it on my website, and I'll advertise it. And people can come to my website and download it, and then anybody can get it, and hey, it's published. So there's a lot of nuance in understanding whether a journal that's publishing research is reputable or not. And again, there's not time in this video to go through that, but I did want to point this out. The concept that there are these predatory publishers. You can find out who people think are predatory publishers by just doing a web search for predatory publishing. Lots of different groups maintain lists of journals that currently exist that they think meet the criteria of predatory publishing. And there is no real formal definition of what a predatory publisher is, but I've listed some characteristics here that you might look out for as you look at both when you publish articles, what journal do you want to send it to, but also as a reader of literature. Knowing whether the journal that you're looking at when you read this paper is a reliable publisher. Do you think that they really did a good job at picking real peer reviewers and peer reviewing the research? Or was it all a scam and they just put up their website that said, pay us $3,000 and we'll publish your article. So I sent them $3,000 and they published my article. So a few things to look for. Some predatory publishers or potential predatory publishers tend to have lots and lots and lots, 10s, 20s, 30s, hundreds of different journal titles, names of journals that they publish, often in totally unrelated disciplines, like maybe there's an architectural journal and a medicine journal, both published by the same company, right? That's one thing that you might want to look for. Also, there are some databases of research literature that index, that is, they look at the table of contents, and these databases are where we can go, topic for another video, go search for literature using a word-based, text-based search. So there are lots of high-quality, long-standing databases like this, like PubMed and Scopus. As I said here, there are many others. You would want to make sure that the journal that you're looking at is recognized by one of those companies and their databases that we can use as search engines. And again, that's for another video. High publication costs, well, that's true of most journals, but delivered under odd circumstances. Basically, think about this as some predatory publishing is a scam. If you go to their website and you look at the process for how to submit a manuscript and it seems sketchy, it probably is a scam, and they could be a predatory publisher. And then finally, just this is not a complete list of the things you might look for. Just shoddy looking websites with little information is also something to watch out for to identify potential predatory publishers. So let's take a look at a couple of different journals and compare their websites to see if we can get a sense for the quality of the journal. We'll start with the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And the only thing that I want to show you here is that as part of their website, you can find a list of the editorial board members. So we have the page for the editor-in-chief, who's responsible for all of the editors that you see under here, the associate editors, and you've got links to biographies of all of these individuals. The point here is that when you've been in science long enough, you should recognize some of these scientists in the discipline that you're part of. So for example, if I scroll down to see who might be responsible for handling my paper if I submit it to this journal in, say, evolutionary biology or genetics, I recognize the names of a lot of these rather famous geneticists, and that gives me some sense of trust that they will do a good job of handling my paper, finding reviewers, and having it pass through the review process. Now, I want to compare that with another journal that may or may not be a predatory journal. I'm not sure. I just sort of chose it at random. The Journal of Science. Journalofscience.net is its URL. So I go here, maybe I'm considering submitting my manuscript to this journal. So the first thing I would typically do is go to the instructions for authors. And one thing that's a little bit strange to me is that they mention that they're a multidisciplinary journal, and that they study, or they publish, excuse me, in disciplines like medicine, veterinary science, nursing, pharmaceuticals, engineering, science and technology, arts and science, and others. So this is really broad for a journal, which is a little bit strange. And let's see if there's anything else strange about the information here on this page. Not particularly. This is pretty typical. They tell you how to format many of the parts of the manuscript. Oh, but here's something really interesting. It's a little bit odd, actually, it's very odd. They don't charge for the processing of the paper. Hey, that's great. Free publication. That doesn't sound predatory, except outside of context, this might not seem strange, but this is really odd. They want $100 or 1,000 Indian rupees per author to publish this paper. I have never seen that in any journal, that the number of authors changes the price of the journal to publish it, right? So if I have one author, that's great. It only cost me $100. If I have 12 authors, why should I pay $1,200 to publish the paper? So that's a little bit odd. So let's go back up to the top and see what else we can find. Oh, abstracting and indexing. Remember, I mentioned that it matters to a certain extent what databases will add the table of contents, the publications from this journal, to their databases for searching. And so let's take a look at who indexes the Journal of Science. So 16 listed here. None of these are particularly prestigious or important, other than perhaps Crossref. Crossref is a good abstract indexing source. Let's scroll down a little bit and check out the under process. What this means is this journal has applied to these additional databases. These are some important ones that do not yet recognize this journal in their databases: Scopus, Elsevier, and importantly for biological sciences and life sciences, PubMed and Medline. So this is a little bit of a red flag that some search engines haven't yet recognized that this relatively small journal is worth taking their time to index. One other thing for now, there's some other, well, a couple other things. One is I'm kind of intrigued by the name Journal of Science. And that's because it sounds very much like the journal called Science, which is that flagship top tier known around the world journal. Here they've made a new journal called Journal of Science. And it strikes me as really odd that the font and the color they've used for science in their logo here looks almost exactly like the same font and color scheme that the journal Science uses. It seems to me, in my own personal opinion, like they might be trying to trick us into thinking like, oh, this is equivalent to or may actually be the journal called Science. Not sure. Now, last thing for now, let's check out the contact information, because again, we want to see who are the editors or their associate editors. Do we have any confidence that there will be quality handling of manuscripts and peer review? And on the contact page, we get a map that shows us where we send our money, right? $100 per author is going to a company called Pharma Intelligence in India. And we have a mailing address to send our money. And we have a form if we want to get in contact with anybody, right? No actual names show up here, really. And no email addresses, no phone numbers for us to contact them. So all of this makes me wonder how quality this journal is. And I invite you to do the same. As you think about journals, you can use this sort of approach to ask, is a journal that you're reading a manuscript from a potentially reputable or disreputable journal? In conclusion, right, to review, scientists sends their unpublished manuscript, lab report, essentially, to a journal. The editor decides right there, do they reject it and send it back and say, we don't want to peer review it? Or do they say, yes, we'll send it for peer review? Peer reviewers then will advise the journal editor. If they accept it as is, which is really, really rare, if they accept it with revisions, meaning they encourage the authors to fix some problems that the peer reviewers identified, or then the reviewers could advise the editor to just reject it. So ideally, then the reviewers say the authors should revise the manuscript. So the authors do that in step 3 here. At some point in the back and forth between the authors and the editor and the reviewers and the editor and the author and the editors and the reviewers, everything gets fixed and the journal would accept the manuscript for publication, and then it gets published in one of the issues of the journal. So there are some other videos in this series. We just talked about what is a research paper sort of at face value, and where do they come from, and how do they get to be published? Other videos are going to cover content and structure of literature, what's in the manuscript itself, and where do you find particular important points of information, like the goal of the study, the hypothesis, the conclusions, and other information. How to find that research literature, again, these databases that I mentioned. So how to look at a citation and figure out how to find that citation on the internet, say, or in a library, and using these databases to do text searches for literature. And then also talking about different types of research literature that are published, not just research data, experiments, but there are other types of publications that occur as well. So if you're interested in these topics, please check out these other videos. Thanks for watching.